This is our work session, Las Cruces City Council. Today is Monday, May 11th, 2020. It's approximately 2:09 p.m. So we have one item on the agenda, and that is the Animal Services potential transition. And I believe David Dollahan, Assistant City Manager, is going to make that presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. David Dollahan for the record. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Sorry, push the wrong button too soon. So,
and if council is okay with not hitting F5, it actually worked out pretty good because I was able to see your picture and the participants. When you do F5, I have to put it in the middle. If that's okay.
I'm fine with that, Mayor. How will the council? So, as I said, this is the potential transition in the Animal Service Center. I was going to give a little bit of history, and there's a lot of information in this PowerPoint today. Not a lot of data, and I'm not going to spend a great deal of time going over that with you. It's available if you want to reference it or you have questions back, but I will show you the slides so you have access to the slide numbers, just for your awareness. The overview of today's presentation is some history on the Animal Service Center. Then it's the current implications from the current Joint Powers Agreement. Then we get into the historical numbers. That's related to both animal intake and outputs. And then the budget is on a fiscal year basis. Some transition proposals and the status of them. Some potential city budget implications for both city and Animal Service Center if one of the transitions goes through. And then the next steps, or the last part of it, before we turn it over to direction and discussion, there are some transition items that you need to be aware of so that we can discuss this. First and foremost, under the history, the Joint Powers Agreement was done between the city and the county only. It was done in 2008 as a result of a takeover of the Doñana County Humane Society in the city building. The city's building has owned the building from its construction in the early 80s on City of Albuquerque land, which is now unrestricted and is City of Las Cruces land. The effective dates of the Joint Powers Agreement, the original was done in 2008 by Resolution 08-309, which was done on June 16th of that year. And then again later that year, August 4th, Resolution 09-043 was passed by the City Council. That was that resolution repealed in its entirety Resolution 08-309. That's the reason for the asterisk. And then we come forward to 2012, and Resolution 12-107 essentially replaces the 2008 updated Joint Powers Agreement. It was a complete rewrite. Some of the items outstanding within the issues of the current Joint Powers Agreement, the 2012 one, is the lack of a lease on the building between the city and the Animal Service Center. And then the city is providing additional administrative services to the ASCMV that is specifically stated within the Joint Powers Agreement that we're not to provide. And I will cover those in a little more detail later. And then also under the terms of the current Joint Powers Agreement, the term is perpetual. If there's any dispute, there is a dispute resolution component. And then there is terms for mutual cancellation of the Joint Powers Agreement or a unilateral cancellation. The mutual cancellation is the two parties are, the city and the county can mutually agree to step away and cancel the Joint Powers Agreement, and they each take with them what they brought to the table, so to speak. I will say this, the city has brought most to the table because of the land and the building is used by ASCMV or both owned by the city. The unilateral cancellation is if one party walks away without the consent of the other, then the other party takes over. That presents some difficulties because the city does own the building. Hitting some JPA issues that The lease did call for, in 2012, the JPA called for a lease from the city to the Animal Service Center for the building. The wording in the JPA is the city shall develop a lease. The two parties shall have a lease on the building. That was never done for whatever reason. Also within the JPA in 2012, it calls for animal counts. That is being done on a regular basis, both intake and outputs, how many animals come in from each entity and the type. And I'll hit on some of that in the presentation. I don't really know that it's not really stated in the JPA as to why that number, the animal counts, is important, but it assumes a transition to a per animal cost basis to both the city and the county. The JPA also requires monthly meetings of the board. Unlike some of the other joint powers agreements, specifically the South Central Solid Waste and the Sia Valley Regional Dispatch Authority, I believe their JPAs both say they have to meet at least quarterly. They can meet monthly as needed. This one is very specific that the board shall meet monthly. Last bullet is the city as the fiscal agent is providing for uncompensated services specifically listed in the JPA that were not to be provided by the city, and that includes risk management, employee assistance programming, drug testing, training, and onboarding of employees. As the fiscal agent, the city does have the responsibility of accounting for the books, paying its bills on its behalf. It does have payroll responsibilities because those checks are cut through the city's payroll system to pay the employees. And there is keeping of employee records. But these 4 items listed on your screen were specifically excluded. On other issues, not related to the JPA, but a matter of awareness for the council, in addition that there's no lease, there's also no credit in the budgeting or for capital improvements against the lease that are made by the city, or for that matter, made by the ASCMV. For example, the improvements that were done in 2019 was $1.1 million of improvements. That's a front addition and remodel to the building, the existing building. There's no credit against the lease for those capital improvements that were made by ASCMV. Also within the JPA, there is no increase calculated in the budget or a growth factor or how to manage major expenses such as capital improvements or expanded programs. For your information, the third bullet, reduced number of population. Due to COVID-2019 and a change of practices by both city and county animal control, the numbers in the population at the Animal Service Center have gone down, which is a good thing. That doesn't mean it will stay that way. It has primarily to do that city and county animal control are only dealing with dangerous animals or hurt and injured animals or animals that have caused a bite. So the population is at almost an all-time low. I would make that argument. Clint Thacker is on the line as well, and he may add to that if you have specific questions. But I'll keep in mind that no matter what happens with the Animal Service Center, there is a minimum number of staffing to handle a minimum number of animals. You always have to feed and care for the animals 24/7, 365. They don't take holidays for any animal in the shelter. And if we were to reduce the population to 1 animal per kennel or below, you still have to have a minimum number of staffing to come in and take care of the animals, whether they're waiting to be returned to their owner or adopted. There are no provisions for other services within the budget, such as qualified low-income, low-cost spay and neuter. Those services, the ASCMV, because of how tight their budget has been over the last 2 years, has essentially cut back public spay and neuter to the general public for anyone that they're only doing spay and neuter for animals that are adopted out of the shelter or while in the shelter pending adoption. I'm going to hit on the proposed transitions and some of the nuances with the slides. Slide 1 or slide 8, phase 1, the city's transition. With mutual consent, the city assumes that ASCMV is a city department. Its staff and its director would report through the chain of command to the city manager, city organization. The ASCMV would include the direction or management of the animal control function, though those two items are interconnected clearly, and they need to work mutually together and hopefully under one director. That is not a requirement, but that is one item for evaluation in this transition. We would propose from a budgeting standpoint to set it up as a special revenue fund. It ensures that the funds are preserved in that fund. For example, the CDBG and home program are considered special revenue funds. That means the money is restricted for that purpose, and any money they get and generate would stay there. The animal control function, or ACOs, may be part of the city's general fund and could report to the ASCMV. Or it could be both, or both the animal control function and ASCMV could be put into a special revenue fund. We have options there. Then the next bullet talks about the cancellation of the existing JPA. And then we would move to a new MOU, MOA, Memorandum of Understanding or agreement, or even an intergovernmental agreement between the city and the county. That basis is to continue to accept the county's animals at the animal shelter. The animal service center would still provide the reclaim option if people are reclaiming their pet out of the shelter, and then they would adopt the animal out if it becomes unreclaimed. Essentially, it's a contract for services. We would propose to help with consistency basis, a flat fee for a fixed period of time, probably 2 years at most, and then future rates would be determined on a formulaic basis. This would be similar to the Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch Authority, which has a free structure, and it's a major split between the city and the county. In that example, MIRVDA is housed in a county building, and so the county pays 47% of the major budget. The city pays 47%. You could work out a similar component in doing so, just to receive credit for the fact that Animal Service Center is operating out of our building. Going on, it would save on administrative charges and incorporates the ASCMV into the city as city requirements and functions, such as its personnel rules, its finance rules, how it procures things, and so forth. As part of that, this phase 1 transition proposes a new board, an animal care advisory board. So the staff and the executive director report through the chain of command. This animal care advisory board would report to the city council, just like your other boards. And it would be appointed and reports to the city council on issues. Its structure, as presented in this example, is a non-standard board. There would be council representation from each of your districts and one appointed by the mayor. A veterinarian to provide healthcare oversight, and potentially county or other city representation on the board, because the shelter center, Animal Service Center, provides all of the sheltering services for rescued animals in Doña Ana County. The board could take any other function, any other responsibility, or any other formation as the will of the council is directed to staff and establishment. The other thing is the board could provide recommendations for appropriate policy updates to the city council and could review practices and procedures within the Animal Service Center and animal control functions. Phase 2, this was a previous proposal which was derived from previous city manager Eid, which was a takeoff of the city's phase 1 transition. This was the city assumes management of the county animal control of the county's animal control function, in addition to what was proposed in phase 1. This would require a new joint powers agreement or with major modifications. It would be in such that you could propose it to have no oversight board. Really, the reason you would need a joint powers agreement is to allow for the cross enforcement of city and county animal control ordinances with the respective staff. This is similar to recent changes that were done with the extraterritorial zone joint powers agreement. Essentially, the city, in that regards, we used to have the ETZ commission and authority. Those two boards were disbanded, and all of the policy and enforcement actions was provided to the county because the ETZ is within unincorporated Doñana County. The city has input on ordinance changes through our regular development process and through ultimately the city council. And then the city staff also have review authority and provide comments on land use decisions or land use cases. But essentially that authority for approval resides with the county's planning and zoning commission or county commission. I see the administratively, it's made it a lot easier on handling the budget for the ETZ, and also it's made it easier for the clientele who are subject to ETZ jurisdiction. So there is precedent in many ways, and you could structure the board. The next several slides are to give you a 12-year plus history of animal intake. That's how the animals come into the board, into the center. These are reported on a calendar year basis, and it gives you a historical overview. For Las Cruces, the total over 12 years, essentially 11 years, there's not much numbers from 2008, and then 2020 we're in still currently. The good news is the total numbers are going down. Our highest year was 73,092 animals intake in 2009, and then 2019 was the lowest year at 4,300. That's good. These totals do not include two categories of animals. Wildlife, because it was a relatively small number, and people who have returned adopted animals, which were in the 100, less than 200 for both the city and the county. So our two biggest number of animals for the city coming in are those turned in by the public as unrestrained animals, and then also unrestrained animals caught running at large by city animal control functions. So on an 11-year average, we have 5,900 animals coming in from the city, 3,500 of which are from animal control, and another 1,200 are from the public. Jumping to the county's numbers, you'll see something very similar. Their numbers are lower. They're about 5,000 total numbers over the same period lower. They've had some higher years than we have had. Their first 3 years were substantially higher than the city's first 3 years. for total intakes. But last year, calendar year 2019 was their lowest year. They too see unrestrained animals coming in from the public and their animal control owners, but their second biggest number is coming from owner surrenders. People who have, for whatever reason, are giving up their animal to the center to adopt out. That's their second highest category of numbers. Jumping to slide 11, if you look at the splits, the average over the 10, 11-year period is 52.3% city, 47.7% county. One thing you should keep in mind related to the budget and to these numbers, there are animals that come in from the town of Mesilla, Hatch, Sunland Park, Anthony. Those are not accounted for in this number because their numbers are de minimis in the whole scheme of things, just so you're aware. So that's the intake. That's the number coming in on a per year basis. Outcomes. Here's a broad overview of the outcomes for the same 11-year period, 2009 to 2019. My screen, there's over 125,000 numbers going out. Sorry, I can't see the 129,000 numbers going out. This includes those that were euthanized, adopted, rescued, RTO means return to owner, deceased or expired in the shelter, wildlife releases, and stolen or missing. People in the past have stolen animals from the shelter, or the animal ends up missing through escape or whatever. You'll notice that the numbers of euthanasia are going down. 1875 was the 2019 number. Rescues and adoptions have adoptions have been fairly consistent, though 2019 was the highest number recorded year of adoptions, and then 2017, 2018, and 2019 are the three highest years on rescue. By rescue, that means the animals were adopted out to a nonprofit or community rescue group. I attribute that increase in 2017, 18, and 19 due to the efforts of the staff and the new executive director. Those are some progressive numbers. It's not perfect. I think we would all like to see the Animal Service Center of the Mesilla Valley work themselves out of the business, but we don't actually believe that to be the case. The next slide, the next two slides are related to their budget. It outlines the city's contribution, the county's contributions, as you can see, what was paid for by other cities, all other revenues, and the total. Those numbers from the city and the county varied over the first year until we got to 2012 and the new joint powers agreement. And then their expenses are the city charges an admin fee. Also included with that is audit fees. And then the personnel expenses, operating expenses, and then capital improvements that they've made. That includes vehicle and equipment purchases that were done out of the Animal Services General Fund. I want to point out to you, I did not include grant funds at this time in this budget. The reason is the revenue is restricted and it ties to a direct expense, so they work each other out. So I excluded those across the years, trying to give you an opportunity to compare apples to oranges. Their budget starting in 2010 was around the $1.8 million a year in expenses. In 2012, you'll notice that the number, the city and the county contributions started matching dollar for dollar, give a few 5 cents a year. But then their budget has needed to increase. And the next slide will hit on that. In 2015, that was the first year that there'd been an increase in the city and county's contribution, and that was only roughly $22,000 increase. There you've seen some numbers from the cities, other cities, $14,000 and $15,000, and then it drops back down to less than $10,000. All other revenue, and then your expenses. The biggest expense, as with the Animal Service Center, is the same as it is with the city personnel, though they do have operating expenses that are there as well. In 2019, at the request of the Animal Service Center, due to what I would say is deferred activities not being funded, the contribution was increased in 2019 to both the city and the county to the 1.25 million. And the FY20 budget on the far right-hand column, those are year-to-date numbers, thus the asterisks. It is budgeted at 1.25 million. So we're in May now. At the April budget meeting for the Animal Service Center, we were advised by the county the Animal Service Center was going to ask for an increased contribution in the next fiscal year budget, FY21. The county has advised the city staff and ASCMV due to budget constraints over at the county is going to county management is going to recommend to the commission, due to budget shortfall because of COVID, the county is going to propose to adopt their same FY20 budget in FY21, which would limit the county's contribution to 1.25 million. The city could over contribute, but that is a decision to be made as part of the city's budget process. Slide 15, this is just a breakdown of the city and the county's contributions year over year. And as you'll see in the last column on the last three columns on the far right, 2021, it is a questionable. The two bottom bullets relates to the question of, is the city's transition to assume the Animal Service Center into its operations realistic or not? It is doable. It can become a city department with limited financial negative impact, in my opinion. Leanne DeMouche might disagree with me. When we analyze the numbers on the county, and I didn't include that slide, I just realized, it more than taking over the county animal control function because of the equipment and the staffing and their difference in pay. The city's animal control officers are paid substantially higher than county, yet the county's animal control officers have newer equipment. The county also has animal care responsibilities for their court hold facility that's on the corner of Griggs and Walnut, or near Griggs and Walnut, and also they can use the county fairgrounds for larger livestock, though that's not always happened, but it has happened in the past. Item 6, slide 16, this is a very busy slide, and I'm sorry for that, but I was trying to get through this. This looks at option phase 1, the city and the Animal Service Center of the Mesilla Valley, and I'll make this slide bigger, hold on. I'll fill up the screen as best I can. It talks about how much, if you brought this ASCMV to a city department and you merged it with animal control as a special revenue fund, and the county contributed $1.25 million, this tells you what the city's contribution would have to be, essentially $2.6 million. That number, of course, in scenario 2 goes down if the county contributed more at $1.75 million, and it goes down further if the county were to contribute $2 million. So the bottom of the slide, scenario 3, is the city and the county's money are almost equal.
David,
Yes.
can you F5 this presentation?
Sure. Let me.
Councilor Sorg, I don't know if you heard. That's okay. We're good.
Mayor, if you hit the escape screen right now, it should lock it back to the right for you.
No, we're good. I have it all the way to the far left. It's not that much.
So there's some animal control includes increases in their budget for fuel and motor pool repair. That would have probably occurred anyway. There are some savings to the Animal Service Center, both the $100,000 plus an admin fee, $29,000 in workers' comp fees, and $3,800 in unemployment and audit fees and capital. Those are savings by doing this merger. And then it covers, the city would cover the shortfall. So I'm going to go to the next slide. This is the same options as previously discussed. The only thing is we leave the animal control in the general fund. So there's not much difference between them, though there is a little bit of savings to the city. I know it's a lot of information, and we'll probably have more questions. You will probably have more questions, and we will have more answers to get to you than we will have answers for you today. Next slide. The next 2 slides, I wanted to give you this overview. The thought is to transition to a per animal budgeting or cost in future years, rather than a flat contribution from the city and the county. Based on these bullets are to give you a highlight. The annual fiscal budget on the next slide, it talks about, that includes the both indirect cost, reoccurring direct cost, and non-reoccurring direct animal care costs. I think I have that worded in there twice. It's supposed to be non-reoccurring and reoccurring direct animal care costs. The intake number on the chart talks about the 3 previous calendar year total numbers. It's an average, and it assumes no other services. And then the average animal stay. For each of those years, what was the average number of days that an animal stayed within the center? For FY21, that is a 3-year average. And then the animal care days, the 4th bullet, is the total intake of animals times the average animal stay. Then the cost per animal day is the total budget divided by the animal care days. And then the 2 bottom rows were city and county animals. That's the average yearly, either the yearly number for the city and the county or a 3-year average. And then the city and the county cost per animal per day based on the average number of stays. So I'm going to jump to the screen and I'm going to walk you through the first example. So here's the formula. Based on Animal Services Center's $2.5 million budget in FY18, I took their average 3-year intake over the 3 previous years, calendar years, That's 10,155 animals per year. In that year, the average stay was 20 and a half days. So this number times this number gives you the number of animal care days. That's how many days they had to care for all the animals on average in a year. That's a lot. Then you take this number, the 200,000, and divide it into their budget, and that gives you their cost per animal per day. That's $12.85. Sounds really great when you put it in that perspective. Then I took the 1285 and multiplied it by 5,134. That's the number of city animals that were brought in. That gives you $1.3 million. For the county, they brought in 4,600 animals, and that gives you a number of $1.18 million. Doing the same for all the fiscal years, then it comes out across the number of animals, the cost per animal goes down. The budget is driven by how many animals are contributed by the city and the county. And then 1 year, FY20, tying it to their budget, it would have been $977,000 as the city's contribution and $778,000. The last two columns are FY21. That's taking an average over the previous 3 years and doing our magic, and that comes out to $11.88 per day per animal per night stay at the shelter, or day stay at the. You get it to a number about 1.35 million and 1.23 million. This last column is what was requested by the Animal Service Center as part of their budget. That doesn't take into account the fact that this county is not willing to, proposing to increase their budget. And this includes some major capital and some expanded services for the next year. That roughly, based on the 3-year average, puts the city's cost at $2 million and the county's cost at $1.9 million. So that's a lot to share real quick, but I wanted some transition items that if we were to proceed with this, just some things to be aware of. The city animal control officers are represented by police union. We would want to respect that, or at least respect some form of union representation. That would have to be a dialogue with the city and the union. Retirement changes with para. We've checked with para. The Animal Service Center is on a different plan from the city's different plan for its employees. We can do that. Para has confirmed that. All we have to do is provide a notice to para, and then the employees become hired by the city and their retirement moves over. Future items for consideration. We're working on the animal control ordinance update. One of the items that is included in there is a change to the fees, that there would not be a pet licensing fee. Their ending fund balance reserve, that has to do with any money left over at the Animal Service Center. If you unspent, what would happen to that money? That needs to be addressed. And also not considered within this presentation is the fact that an expanded shelter will be coming online in FY 2022. That's a year from this July or August. The nice part about that is it will be a new, more efficient shelter, a better shelter. It'll make for easier cleanup, reduced health issues because of overcrowding issues and the like, and it'll allow the old shelter to be repurposed potentially as a medical facility for the shelter and potentially for low-cost spay and neuter. And my next slide, there's two, this is the next last one. How would you like for us to proceed? Further analysis, report back to the council and potentially the county commission and that coordination. In the ideal world, the potential transition could occur by July 1st, 2021. That allows us for planning and negotiations with the county. There are some audit advantages of waiting until the start of the new fiscal year. I don't believe it can be done this July 1, so that's why I put July 1 of 2021. The other option is the status quo, and this will need to be discussed with the county as well. Address the issues with the JPA, look at the lease, secure a lease, and work on a plan on how to better manage the funding and the contributions. And with that, Mr. Mayor, this is for the discussion screen, and this is my brood of animals at home, and the whining in the background is the Doberman named Dobby in the lower right-hand corner. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That's quite a bit of information you did, and you did a fantastic job, David. I'm gonna, before I turn it over to Councilor Flores and others, if I may just share with you my take on this. I think it's fair to say that I helped bring this forward a few years back, and let me explain to you why. So, as you know, the Animal Services Board consists of 3 members of the city, 3 of the county, and then you all hire a director. So there was a while back, a few years back, we were having problems with the director, and the director would not really listen to the city manager or county manager, and it got very frustrating. And things weren't happening. We were catching all kinds of, members of the animal community were just upset, and we couldn't really do anything. And so that's when I got with the county. I said, hey, let's take a look at this and maybe let us take it over. And they were, pretty happy about it. I don't know how it is about now, but back then they were happy about it, and that's how we started moving in this direction. And then Fernando took over, and we also got a new director. And so things seemed to calm down quite a bit. But nonetheless, that's how this discussion got started. Now, if you think about it, the reason why we wanted to have this under the city is so they would be part of the city function, and that our management team would have direct authority over that director. And we wouldn't have to deal with a lot of the things that were happening 3 or 4 years ago, which have not happened since. But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen in the future. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we either leave it alone or we take it over completely. And one of the things that, and as much as I appreciate David putting that formula together, that's a lot. And you got to remember, there's a lot of animals that come in every day, and to keep track of them like that, that's got to be so tedious. I think we're actually in the driver's seat, because if the county doesn't want to, I would just do averages. And if the county doesn't want to pay, well then let them build their own shelter, which of course they're not going to want to do. If they were to say and play hardball with us, well then say build your own jail. Hey, I've built a jail before. We built that one for $100 a square foot, and that used to actually make money. It was an enterprise zone until they moved it into their general fund. So, and anyways, that's another story. So that's kind of where I'm at. I would like for us to probably look at taking it over completely and have that authority, because that was really what precipitated the whole discussion. So I'm going to go with Councilor Flores, Mayor Pro Tem, Bandera, Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, David Dollahan. It was a beautiful, a wonderful, your collage of your animals at home. I need a copy of that. So which one is the one that's retarded or has problems of your cats? Is it Mars or is it Snicker? Yeah, the one that cries a lot in the background?
Madam, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Flores, Snicker is the crier, and that's the one that always meows on our meetings. Mars, as you can see, is behaving poorly because he's sitting in a chair that has a plant in it. So they all have their issues. So that's what we do with the rescue. So.
Naughty, naughty, Snicker, Mars. But thank you for the wonderful presentation. It broke down. When I saw it was on the agenda, I asked interim city manager David Maestas for this, and I think it was all part of your preparation. But so it answers a lot of my questions, and it looks like I agree with the mayor. I believe that if and already they've already made it clear that the county is not going to come through. The only concern I have, the county, it's easy to say go build your own, but what are they going to do, with all the animals? I know that their RTOs, or return to owner policy, is very different than what we exercise here in our city. Our ACOs, animal control officers, actually make sure that that if there's a stray, if there's a animal out, they'll try to find out if it belongs to someone in the neighborhood. They try to see if they have a chip, a license, whatever, some identification. And when they do find a place to perhaps ask whether the animal belongs there, they make sure that the animal is then placed in that home, returned to the owner right then. And all the fact that they make sure there isn't an open gate or a broken fence that still exists, that sort of safeguard to make sure the animal doesn't get out again, whereas the ACOs in the county will just pick up the animal, locate the address perhaps, and you just throw them back in the same condition, or the objective conditions that let the animal out in the first place. There might be a broken fence, that, and the other. There's different ways of looking how all of this is done. But I don't know what would happen to those animals or strays or whatever, and that's concern. But in terms of what we're looking at financially, it just looks like we aren't going to be getting a lot of money from the county. That buzz. Commissioner Manny Sanchez brought that up when Clint did his presentation at a board meeting. He made it clear that the county wasn't going to come through with the money. Which means that the city has to pick up the tab. That maybe it doesn't have to, but my understanding is that the city does pick up the tab. So we're left in a position where we don't have the autonomy to make decisions that benefit the shelter. It's almost like, carrying this dead weight with a county. So my inclination is that we take that third option that you presented, Mr. Dollahan. I think it was the three options of how to break away from the JPA, which is, it could be the unilateral. We have a mutual cancellation, unilateral cancellation, and dispute resolution. So if we can exercise the option of the unilateral cancellation, I think we should go that route. I don't know if I don't know where it's how this decision will impact the county, but I am concerned about, the animals. I mean, where are they going to be taken? Are they going to be taken to the county, land out there where they take the livestock, and are they going to have the facilities there to really take care of cats and dogs and rabbits and skunks and stuff like that? Well, skunks pretty much get terminated, but so those are just my thoughts, and thank you again very much. But Mr. Dollahan, it does seem like breaking away unilaterally is an option that we can exercise, and at this point it really does look like the best option to me. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Stephen.
can I address Councilor Flores' comment on my reading of the joint powers agreement? The unilateral cancellation is probably the worst one based on the wording of it. I think we need to go to a mutual cancellation. That's why we need to look at some potential compromises on an animal care advisory board. I think that's necessary. An animal care advisory board will help you on the policies of the animal control ordinances and the policies and the procedures at the shelter and how animal control works. I don't know that any of us are exactly happy with the way ASCMV functions now, especially budgetarily and from a control standpoint. To the mayor's point about management of the shelter, with the board selection of Mr. Thacker, I've seen a significant improvement. We've come a long way, baby, and I tell Mr. Thacker every day I'm glad he's there, and I'm still glad he's there. We've improved. He's improved and his staff has improved, and it's a tough job. But if you were to flat out ask me what's a recommendation is, I think the city is in better control if we control the center ourselves, and then work to have the county still bring their animals to our shelter. There's some added benefit of cost savings on a per animal basis. We still have to feed an animal. We still have to clean up after them. Why should the city and the county duplicate cost when we already have a building? We're working on a second building. We're looking at minimal staff additions because of the second building. It's a reallocation of staff from the existing staff from one building to two buildings. We think we can do that in preliminary discussions with Clint. So I think the best is mutual cancellation and working out the details on how that would happen. And Mayor, I will point out one option. I'm not supportive of us building our own jail, because the county is statutorily obligated to provide a jail, just like they're obligated to provide for a county courthouse and a district courthouse and a health building. Mm-hmm. And by the way, city residents are all taxpayers to Doñana County. Mm-hmm. So let's not forget that.
Sure. Well, thanks, David. And I think if we were to work with them and ask them, let them know our concerns and ask them how much time they would need for them to figure out when to get their animals wherever, I think they'll come to the table. I mean, that would be our initial. Obviously, our number one thing is to work together with them, much like we just charge them for the animal. But I don't know about keeping it. I would just average it, and then just every year if we fall short, raise the price. And like I said, we have that. I think we have that authority to do that.
Mr.
Yes, Councilor Flores.
I have a follow-up question for Mr. Dollahan. So, Mr. Dollahan, the unilateral agreement isn't, I'd like to see the JPA. If you could send it to us, to the board members, please. If you could just send it to me, my request to me. I'd like to see the JPA, but I totally respect your reading of the options. And but the mutual agreement to dissolve the JPA, is probably the most diplomatic way to go about, but why, what are the other benefits of doing it? Is it just to have a friendly divorce here, or do we really, would it just be ugly if we didn't? What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
If I may, David, before you jump in, Counselor, I think we have to determine, do we want to take it over in its entirety first? If that's the will of the council, then we come up with ways of dissolving the JPA. That doesn't mean that the county's going to go away and build their own. They may just say, okay, all right, well, if that's what we got to, I would think that they would at the least 2 years pay us what we tell them we got to get from them, and then after that, it's up to them what they want to decide to do. That's my thing. This dissolving does not mean that they just go away. We would have to dissolve it even if they agreed to say, yeah, go ahead, take it over, city, and we'll pay you so much a year. We still got to dissolve the JPA. Isn't that correct, David?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor, you are correct. We do in some form, shape, or fashion have to dissolve the JPA because under New Mexico law, the Joint Powers Agreement, it is its own entity. So you're doing away with an entity. I believe it even has its own federal tax ID number.
Yeah, it's a JPA.
So it has to be canceled or dissolved in some form or fashion. Mr. Chairman, I will send all of the council a link to that resolution that approved the JPA in 2012. It's resolution 12-107, and it's an online link from the city's records online.
Mr. Dollahan, based on your putting this presentation together, were there years, in fact, when the county did not provide its share of costs or per the agreement? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Flores, I only went back to 2012. I didn't review the 2009 amendment or late 2008 amendment. But looking at the funding formula from 2012 forward, the county has always met their obligations to what was agreed to financially.
Thank you, Mr. Dollahan, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Pro Tem Gandara?
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, David, for your work on this presentation. Very thorough. I appreciated having the history even before I sat on the board or was chair of the Animal Services Board. I know that Mr. Thacker's on the line and stands for any questions and whatnot. And I want to say publicly that I've appreciated his leadership. He has really turned we just have continued to improve. And I agree with Mayor that the former director, we did have some concerns, and we were getting a lot of feedback from the animal advocacy groups about decisions, just different things, the lack of coordination and collaboration with all folks, but Clint reminds us all the time when we took over that facility, where it was at and what that former director had been able to do with the just given the conditions of the facility and the animals. And so there was a lot of change that she did as well. So I want to say that publicly. It's just part of a continuous improvement process, right? And we're just going to keep getting better and better. And so one of the things that I have continued to be concerned about is with the GEO bond and going to the voter and asking the voters to approve a measure and basically building out a new facility for the animal services. And we're asking the county residents to assist really in that process. And I don't believe that even with the formula, David, that you put together, that into account. And so I really feel really strongly, and not only that, because over time, and if you look at the amounts, there have been, I guess, many opportunities where the county has given forth more money than the city has over time. At least that's how I looked at it. I could be wrong. You were going through those slides pretty quickly. So, but I also know that the facility, for, I guess, whatever, the joint powers of agreement, the city took over that facility, and over many, many years, the facility deteriorated up until very recently. We put a lot of money in that HVAC renovations because of the conditions that building was and that the animals were in, and never once asked the county for any more money as it relates to that. So we have put forth a lot of funding. David, in that formulary there, is all that HVAC and everything a part of these totals?
Madam Chairman, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm used to you being the chair of the Animal Service Board. Sorry, bad habits.
Former chair.
Former chair, sorry. That does not reflect anything of the city's capital improvements to the building or the Animal Service Center's capital improvements to the building. This is strictly operating the year over year. I will say the city and the county, looking at this chart that I shared my screen on, I believe this is slide 15. The dollar amounts equaled the same starting in 2013. That's because of the new JPA. The difference, I didn't go back to 2009 and look at the JPA as to why there was a difference in the formula. I can research that for you, but I considered it moot because we've moved on from there, and we've been consistent since 2013.
Yeah.
I can look at the difference and figure it out, but these are actual audited numbers reflected there, except for FY20 and 21.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that, David. I think that's important, and probably just something to have as we move forward, because I, for one, agree that we should take that over, take the center over as a city. I think we can do it very amicably. And honestly, anytime, at least in the times that I, when I first got elected, we had this joint meeting. And although it took a little bit to get people up to speed, and because of the fact that the representation, people weren't aware of what was happening, those kinds of things. I think that County Manager Macias has been interested in wanting to look at that, and we even spoke of, well, swapping. You take over the the financial woes of the detention center, and we'll do, redo our MOA there, but also and take over sort of the financial of and the building and everything of the Animal Services Center. And it felt like there was some genuine interest. I can't begin to understand the county's financial woes or whatever. I know there is a bit of concern about putting forth an increase in the budget because of the goals that we have in mind in terms of an additional veterinarian and all the other things that we feel need to happen in the coming years. But they would have met their obligation if we hadn't changed or made the increase. So I'm still concerned about, I think that formula, David, the amount of the capital, all the improvements that we've made, I think should be a part of this, just so folks know that we are constantly looking at that and improving that building. And oh yeah, we approved all that funding to actually do a new building, right? Construct a new building. And I think that's important as well. That has to be accounted for. In terms of the formula, if you will, I wondered, and I don't know how you came up with that other than what you explained here, but I'm wondering if things like breeds and larger breeds, the conditions that the animals come in or over time as they stay, because sometimes animals are needing operations or very significant medical care, like in the time when we had those problems 2 years ago, very costly medical care, right, to ensure the health, that we were administering vaccines and medication and just all the changes in terms of protocols and cleaning that we had to do, those kinds of things that I wonder if it would look differently if we took that into account.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Gondra, it could. There's some assumptions in this. This was a discussion with Clint and Mike and our budget staff as how to get to this formula that's shown on
Sure.
slide 19. This is straight numbers. This doesn't differentiate between cat and dog. There are cleaning expenses associated with a cat versus a dog. You've got litter versus no litter. Larger breeds eat more, and so forth. So this is a straight line per animal basis, regardless of the animal type or its gender or anything like that, or any long-term care expenses. It also doesn't take into account other revenues from fees, for like adoption fees or reclaimed fees or anything like that. So those could be subtracted out based on historical numbers as well. What numbers were reclaimed and what do our reclaim fees account for? Does that account for a daily expense? So these numbers could go down, but I've made a note to account for capital improvements both by the Animal Service Center and the city as part of that, and also differentiating possibility between animal size, type, medical care, and et cetera.
Okay, I think that would be important. I wonder, I'm assuming that it would look a little differently. I don't know that, but I especially know in being the chair during that very trying time where Clint and everybody had to really come together and look at their cleaning protocols and look at how we were going to separate animals and address the sick and give medications and that kind of thing. It became pretty costly. Well, I'm saying pretty costly, but I don't know. I'm not into the day-to-day stuff. So I wonder if just looking at that, because I wonder if that is going to be the difference year to year if we do take it over, right? The conditions that the animals come in, how the length of stay that they have, more they the longer they stay, the more expensive they get, kind of thing, especially if they're sickly. Lastly, one of the things over time that I've always been incredibly concerned about is the sort of the difference of the players, supervisors, and kind of essentially the philosophies, if you will. I think Clint has done a very good job of bringing people together. I think our task force has been a really good place to bring everybody together. Really, I wouldn't say force, but it brings people together to really have some difficult conversations about the ordinances, philosophies, what we do, what we don't do. They bring up, different things that I think we don't consider. You have the animal advocates there. And so I think Clint has done a good job, because initially we were having some trouble about like for me, it's always like, why aren't we doing this a certain way? And what kind of conversations have you had? And I know as a chair, I was getting a lot of emails about, well, the ACOs did it this way. This is what happened. I was having to intervene with you and past city management about sort of the ACOs and how they handled different things. Same with the county. At least as a chair, because I'm no longer chair, I don't get those kinds of emails anymore, kind of daily stats, sort of the issues that the Animal Services Center staff was having. And so I was always for, it would be nice for everybody to be under one umbrella where the supervision was offered by one individual, meaning, Clint as a director, and then we could do a lot of strategic planning in terms of and looking at our philosophy about how we return animals and those kinds of things. And I've always felt there was a disconnect. And so because of that, I think it's even more important that we come in under one. So it allow, and I know there's some concerns and you have to talk to the union, and I know Clint is getting some feedback about that. And I'd love to hear more from Clint about sort of his ideas or what his feeling is about some of that. So the rest of the council has that opportunity to, well, meet him for one, and two, to hear from him and his perspective about what he sees moving forward. So thank you, Mayor.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, did you want to hear from Clint now, or did you want to wait till after council has their questions?
I don't know what council, how council feels, but it's a lot to, I'm sure he wants to weigh in some of the questions and concerns have been brought up, so I'm not sure. It's the will of the council, you Mayor, whatever you think is the best way to proceed.
Well, why don't we, if it's okay with them, why don't we let Clint jump in, say a few things. That way there, it could actually prompt different questions of what council was going to ask. And they could then divert and ask Clint something different. If that's okay with you all. Is that okay? Clint, are you there?
I am, yes, sir.
Okay, so there you go. You have the floor if you want to say your comments about what you've heard so far, what was being discussed, why you think it might be best, if that's what you think, that have it under one roof instead of the way it is now, and just things like that.
All right, I think the council's done a very good job so far of
Excuse me,
nailing the head.
Excuse me, one second, Clint. I just need you to identify yourself, please. I know we said who you are, but I need you to just say that, please.
No problem. Clint Thacker, Executive Director at Animal Service Center, Mesilla Valley. I believe the council has done a very good job of bringing up some of the concerns and things that we have, and also resolutions of how to fix them. David did a really good job on the presentation. I appreciate his representation there. The COVID has really changed how animal services industry is going to be going forward. Part of the groups that I'm in, their shelters are empty, just like ours is getting there too. Right now, we are trending generally around 550 animals is where we usually are. Right now, we are, I think yesterday's Facebook post was 180. So we're not talking just a little bit down. We're talking record lows, never seen these numbers before. And it's providing opportunities for our staff to do some amazing things, some enrichments of, and also some ideas, playing with the animals, getting them out so they're a lot more adoptable. Now, with that said, it's also causing some major heartburn on my end because I don't know quite how to budget for this. It's a hard one when you look at what could be and what is. If we continue and accepting injured, sick, vicious, bite animals, things like that, going from here on out.
Clint, we're kind of losing you a little bit.
Need animal control on.
Clint, we're kind of
I'll
losing
see
you.
if I can get some. Can you hear me better now?
I think so.
All right. Where did I get to?
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Clint, you were talking about the budget, hard to budgets, heartburn. How do we move forward with looking at the budget and such?
Yeah, so it's going to be really hard looking at that and doing that budget if we don't know for sure what the future of the intake of our animals are going to be. Is city and county animal control, are they going to stick with what they're doing and say only sick, vicious, mean, aggressive, these are types of animals coming in? If so, I can budget towards that. Is it going to be going back to what it was and we were going to be at 500, 600 animals in the middle of summer? Then I need to budget towards that. I can tell you right now, with the budgets that we're looking at, we're budgeting for animal control to work with us, continue to bring in these low numbers, because that's the future of animal control. The groups that I am in and the people that are the executive directors that are talking are doing phenomenal work in their field, and they have that capacity to say animal control is no longer going to be doing this, or animal control, we have a different way of thinking. Whereas I don't have that capability. I'm only over the animal center. So with me coming on as part of the city, it will be extremely well for me to be able to have that capability and to work with the city council directly and say, this is where we want to go. This is the direction. This is why. This is how it's going to happen. And this is the advantages and the disadvantages of doing so. And right now, I just can't do that. I have no leeway I'm kind of at the mercy of both the city and the council. So, I mean, with that information, I'll open up to any questions that anybody may have.
Okay, well, thanks, Clint. I'm going to go with who's next in line. That's Councilor Vasquez, then Councilor Beta-Stuvie, and then Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Clint. And thank you, Councilor Gandara, Mayor Pro Tem Gandara, for your insight. Definitely a complicated decision. And I think your presentation, Mr. Dallahan, leaves a lot of time to digest and probably a lot more analysis than we have time to maybe even make solid decisions at this work session, at least for me. So I tend to want to lean to more of the folks who have been involved on the board, defer to the expertise of Mr. Thacker in terms of what the right decision is here. But right off the bat, I did want to express a couple of comments that might seem relevant to this discussion. One is, if we do choose an option where the city takes sole control of the Animal Services Center, I think we just have to make sure that whatever agreement we enter into with the county as a contract or whatever fee for services it is that we offer, that it's equitable to the cost of service. And so I don't want us to lock into some type of contract for a year that ends up costing the city a lot more money to perform those duties and services, and then the county perhaps gets more than what they're paying for. And so however that contract design could reflect the actual costs, like, kind of like almost like a variable APR kind of thing, right? Where you have, the county's paying reflective on the services that are needed, especially in the county, because it's not just the cost of operations, but I mean, think about it. If we're going to be enforcing, or if we're going to be acting as a shelter for the entire county and have jurisdiction, especially as city councilors, now our customer service is going to, and I mean that in the sense of like council districts, but also the administration, right? The work that we do is now folks that have complaints about the shelter, or folks that have concerns or have questions are going to go to the city. They're not just going to go to they're not going to go to the county or the city. And so I think we have to take into account those services we're going to deliver. As a city, we are now going to be on the hook for providing good services, right? In Chaparral and in Vado and in Hatch and other places like that, where perhaps the city, we don't have the reach out there in terms of the customer service. I also, question in terms of the animal control ordinances between the city and the county. I'm not sure how those are spelled out currently in the JPA in terms of enforcement and how the Animal Services Center treats those, right? Especially when it comes to like pets that have been either surrendered or that have been caught, I guess, wild, 2 or 3 times. Would want to make sure that the county and the city's ordinances are in line so that we're not enforcing different ordinances. If we're operating everything centrally from the city, I don't know if there could be some type of agreement that the county and the city's pet ordinances and animal control, any pets coming into the animal control or wild animals, I think those policies have to be pretty similar, if not the same, right? Otherwise, then the administrative costs or duties are a little bit more burdensome on the city. I say all this not having a great degree of knowledge of what currently is in place, and so just some thoughts that come to mind in terms of what I'm looking at in this particular agreement. As the county perhaps has more financial issues, again, want to make sure that we are getting our fair compensation for providing these services, and that there's really no way for us to lose out on this particular deal. I don't think it's a bad idea for us to do it, as long as there's some safeguards in there that allow the city to charge adequately, right? We want to be sending maybe an invoice that's reflective of the services every month, rather than having like an annual contract where the city might lose out depending on what happens. And then lastly, I don't know what happens during an economic recession, but in terms of like animal care and animal adoptions and animal, people give up their animals, but also something to be mindful of over the next couple of years. If folks can no longer afford their pets, does that mean that we should be projecting more intake at the Animal Services Center? And so just to Mr. Thacker's point in terms of, questioning what the budget might look like, I don't know if that's a strong consideration we need to make now, but I think financial hard times are ahead, and however that impacts operations at the Animal Services Center, we should also take into account. So that's it for me right now. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Thacker.
Thank you, Councilor.
Mayor,
Yes, David.
may I answer some items for Councilor, based on Councilor Vasquez's commentary? 2 things. I think one of the things that we can go back to and working with the budget staff and Clinton, his staff, is the minimal staffing numbers. To have a shelter, you have to have people to operate it. So what is that base number? And then what is if each kennel is, or every other kennel is full, what's the basic number you need for minimum staffing and minimum operation? And let's start working from there and going up. As far as the animal control ordinances, in 2014, the county led the effort. I think they completed theirs first to rewrite the city's ordinance, the county's ordinance, and then the city mirrored that. So actually, for the most part, they're very equal right now. The only thing that the county doesn't have is the feral cat colony provision within the ordinance that the city does. I think that's why the Animal Care Advisory Board would be very important, because in a fee-for-service or service-for-fee agreement or some other type of agreement with the county would have to sign off on how the city manages. They would have to accept the fact that we're the manager, we're the owner, we're the managing entity for the shelter. And if they're going to bring their animals to us, even for a fee-for-service, they have to know what our rules are and our policies and practices, and they have to live with them. So that's why I think the Animal Care Advisory Board will be a key success to making this a success if you go forward with that transition. So,
Mr. Dallahan, can I just ask you a quick update? A quick question on that. In terms of the actual allowances, zoning, right, with zoning allowances for different types of animal, thinking in particular horses, livestock, chickens, goats, that kind of thing, because most of those are probably, certain municipal zoning. I'm imagining that most of those types of animals are in the county. just based on, location of where some of these potential places exist. It's not so much an ordinance, but it's a question also of like what type of animals is the county going to be bringing in, whether it's like emaciated horses or things like that, right? So is that something that would be reflective or is currently reflective of like the fee for service, right? Assuming that they would bring in animals that require a higher standard of care and a higher cost of care. How do we address that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Vasquez, that's something that we would have to take into consideration. Just what I know from my planning days, there are isolated pockets inside the city limits where livestock are allowed by right based on the livestock and the acreage and so forth. There's a couple down south in District 2. There's a couple in the far east in District 6, and there may be one other area where livestock are regulated in the city, and that's done by our zoning ordinance, and, as well as our animal control ordinance for care. I would say if you have situation, most of the livestock situation is going to come from the county, and that would be something that we would need to address within the ordinance. Speaking of emaciated animals or animals attacked by livestock or unfortunately animal fighting, the previous example is cockfighting, even though it's illegal now under state law, thank goodness. The county has their court hold facility on Griggs, so they hold their own dangerous and vicious animals there. And then they've also held livestock out at the county fairgrounds. So it would be like a mutual aid agreement. We do this. If we had a livestock situation, I would say we would be better off paying the county to handle livestock through their facilities, because they already have them. And they already have staff to manage their court hold facility. But that's something that we can discuss and should be part of our discussion.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, David. One quick question before I get to Councilor Bate-Stubbe. David Dollahan, have you ever, one of the things I was thinking, because a lot of the animals there in the South Valley, especially in Chaparral, that's what I was going to ask, excuse me, let me ask Clint Thacker real quick. Clint, how big of a problem is that in Chaparral?
I think the county has a contract with Chaparral to bring animals in. I don't know if they do their ACO for them.
Well, no, I mean, do you get a lot of strays out there? I mean, a lot of problems with what I was thinking was maybe reaching out to the city of El Paso, because I mean, it's just right there. And for that particular group, work with El Paso and that way there, because, bring them all the way over from Chaparral to Las Cruces can get expensive for them. And it might be cheaper if they were to pay per animal there in El Paso. Then that reduces the use of our facility here in Las Cruces. Hello?
Yeah, it's something. It's something that we can for sure talk to the director about there. I know Paula really well, but some problems are lost.
I'm sorry, Clint. We're cutting up, or we can't really hear you that well.
Clint, you need to repeat what you just last said.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Clint. You could, Clint, if you'd like, call in. Might be a little bit easier and clearer. We don't mind seeing your happy face, but this way here we can at least hear what you're saying.
Mr. Mayor, I will offer this. I'll put that on the list, and I'll have Clint text me or email me his comments. Our only concern is I do know that the county provides animal control function to unincorporated Chaparral. And that imaginary state line causes us a whole lot of difficulties at times. I remember a few years ago when we tried to have a joint city council El Paso city council meeting. We had to go there because they can't meet outside the city limits of El Paso. So it's all these weird rules, and there's also different healthcare rules. Clint's governed by the state because there's shelter rules that are governed by the state. So we'll put it on the list for discussion. But as you can see, Snicker has some input that he thinks is important.
Yeah.
So I'm going to mute, and I'll lower my hand. So if you need me, just call me.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor, can you hear me okay now?
A little bit.
Clint Thacker from Animal Service Center.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes.
All right. And David kind of summed it up for me. I can ask her, Paula Powell is the director there, and I could talk to her about it. The issue that we have is, like he said, crossing state lines, and they're in New Mexico and so on. But I'll ask her. There's nothing wrong with asking.
Yeah, we used to have problems with that when it comes to fire because of there's property at stake, lives at stake, but, and I'm not discounting the animals, but still, I think we might be able to work with that. Might be cheaper for everyone concerned, and they may need the business. I don't know. That'd be good. Okay, so let me go to Councilor Beta Stuvey and Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, David, for that really comprehensive, thought-out presentation. I know I am newly appointed to the Animal Services Board, and it's been very educational on all the different ways. I did have a quick question as far as services go. We as a city, we also don't always, or we didn't at least last year, charge the county for some administrative services that we did. Is that correct?
We usually charge 3% or something like that, don't we, David?
Mr. Chairman, the admin fees under the ordinance are tied to the consumer price index. That's within the JPA. Last year, to help balance the books at the Animal Service Center, we took a budget adjustment both to the Animal Service Center and the City Council to not charge last year's admin fee, but we need to, and that's clear within the JPA. I see it as a one-off, and we need to go back to that, and that was accounted for in their FY21 budget proposal to the city to account for that. That goes away if it's part of the city organization. So that's money not going. I mean, if you look at the admin fee, the city transfers $1.25 million and then turns around and transfers out an admin fee. That's to cover primarily for finance, and it's not that it's not necessary. They are their own entity, but that does go away if they're part of a city. If the Animal Service Center becomes a city department. But that was done only to help balance the books. It was not easy but it had to happen, and we need to go back to charging it.
It's approximately 3%, isn't it, David? Give or take.
I put on the PowerPoint it was 111,000. So it's out of a $2 and almost $3 million budget. So I'm doing the quick calculations.
Oh, maybe it's a little bit more than 3%. Maybe it's 4%. You said 100 and how much thousand?
111,000, Mayor.
It's about 3.7%.
So that's not a small amount either. It does seem, and just offhand, it does seem like the city does take up the majority of some of the work and duties and responsibilities of this program anyways. I think it's something that I would like to see us pursue, although I really am glad to hear some of the comments from Councilor Vasquez to make sure that we do account for those items in the county. But thank you again, David, and thank you for showing us Snickers. We have a face behind the meow.
Yeah, so David, before we get to Councilor Bencomo, do you have permission from the Mars candy company? Do you use those names, I guess? I'm just asking.
He was named after the planet, not the candy bar.
Okay, I got you. Very good. Nice response.
And Snicker was named after Snickerdoodle, not the candy bar as well. So there's no copyright infringement. On that.
Okay. That's amazing that they happen to be names of two candy bars, but that's okay. Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Dallahan, for that really thorough presentation. I really appreciated that. And I have another question about a name. Is that Dubby after the house elf, or no?
It's Dobby after the character from Harry Potter, because he can, ever so often, he can hold his ears just like Dobby does. So that's how.
Dobby's probably my favorite character in that whole series.
Every so often we need a pet sitter, we'll bring him over. You'll change your mind quickly.
Deal. Well, well, I just went to the Animal Services website, which might be might be bad news for me. So, and good news for the shelter. Yes, I have a couple questions. And thank you, Mr. Thacker, for jumping on. It's nice to meet you. I would certainly love, when this is all over, I would definitely love a tour of the facility. As a new counselor, I think that's something that I would really appreciate. How big is the staff, the animal service staff?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Bencomo, they currently have 62 staff.
Wow.
And that's when we're fully staffed. Yes.
Okay. Are right now you not fully staffed?
No, we are not. We are down 14 positions.
Is that because of COVID or other reasons?
Yes, and other reasons.
Okay. Okay, thank you. This conversation regarding, our partnership with the county on this, if we move forward, which seems like it's a good idea, to just sort of take over the center as a whole. This conversation about the county and its ability to pay its fair share. Ultimately, I think the ones that end up hurting in that conversation are the animals, right? Like if the county just doesn't have the resources or aren't willing to come to the table for some of the negotiations on those scenarios that Mr. Dallahan provided, I think ultimately that's a tough position to be in, right? Because are we really going to say, well, then we're not going to take any animals? Because that just doesn't seem like it's something we would be willing to say, right?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Bencomo, I would say you are correct, because it leads to other issues if you don't take the animals. Abandonment
Right.
and abuse and neglect. That's always a concern. I know from the board members, both city and county representation, when we discuss issues like this. There was some consistency done this last year. The county and the city both have surrender fees that they charge an owner if they surrender in the field. And the county and the city manage that process differently through our ACOs. But the ASCMV board discussed as part of their budget retreat and part of their, I think it was less than a year ago, I would think it was in the fall, to adjust that fee for surrender fee, because what people would say to the animal control officer, well, I won't surrender it to you. I'll go to the shelter and I'll surrender the animal. And the surrender fee was substantially cheaper at this center. So the board voted and made the fee the same. So the city, the county, and now the shelter fee for owner surrender are all the same. So if you surrender that animal anyway, you're going to pay the same fee.
What is that fee?
I believe it's $20 now. And it used to be something.
Yeah,
like
it's $25 right now.
Right, sorry. And there is an escalating fee if you turn in more than one animal. So it's to deter them playing the system. And that's what was happening. Well, I'm not going to surrender the animal to the county animal control. They would make the effort to drive it to the center. So now that they're consistent, those are things that we have to be vigilant on, and that's something that the Animal Care Advisory Board would play a role in, both in the city and the county. The city animal control and the shelter functions work together.
That leads to my next question, which was around the advisory board. I've noticed that I think you said in phase 2, there would be no need for an advisory board.
I'm sorry, that was a I was treating it, there would be an animal care advisory board regardless at the city level.
Yes.
There would not be a governing board in phase 2.
Yes, okay.
To the Animal Service Center Board of Directors right now.
Gotcha.
That's what I meant by that. But I think strongly that you need an Animal Care Advisory Board at the
Yes, I would agree with that for sure.
if you go down this line. If you're not, if the Animal Service Center stays this way, then that the board serves as that function in how to manage the policies of the Animal Service Center. That's their role.
Yeah. Good. And then I noticed I felt like the euthanizing numbers were high. Can you talk to me about that? And if there's been a conversation about moving towards becoming a no-kill shelter? And I see Mayor Pro Tem shaking her head, but I think what would that look like in a budget moving forward? And is it possible?
I think I'm going to try to share my screen. I wanted to get it right on the correct slide.
David, while you do that, if I could say a few things. First of all, Counselor, a no-kill shelter is defined by 90% of the animals coming in leaving alive. So we have actually hit that several times in our monthly stats, and we're really close to hitting it for a year long. Now, it does not mean no killing whatsoever, because you're always going to have to euthanize the sick and the aggressive and so on. So we've worked really hard, and our goals are all set towards hitting that 90% mark. And we'll continue to do that. I mean, that's a benchmark that we all strive for.
Great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and also the euthanasia is decreasing every year. And David's probably going to touch on that. And it has dropped incredibly significantly since 2008 when they took it over, when they were euthanizing almost as many animals that were leaving in other ways.
Crazy.
So we've come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for noting that. I appreciate that.
If you could explain also why animals are euthanized, that would, I think, also be a good thing to know.
Yeah, animals are euthanized for any reasons, whether, excuse me, we may do it for court order, and if it's done on a court order, then we do not count them towards our percentages. They're also done for sickness and illness, and we have a very, very specific reasons why they're euthanized. We don't just say sick. We say sick, distemper, and treatment was tried, or no treatment. And we post all those stats on our daily Facebook pages, our daily Facebook page post. So you're welcome to like us on Facebook, and you can see that progress as you're going through.
Yeah, I definitely will. Thank you for that explanation.
And Clint, also, there's also owner requested and also aggressive animals, right? In addition to the list you just noted.
Yes. Yeah, aggressive animals, and owners can come in and say, I'd like to have my animal euthanized. We do reserve the right if the animal's perfectly healthy and they just don't want anybody else to own the animal. We'll tell them that we won't provide that service, but you can surrender it to us and we can get the animal out.
Wow. Interesting.
Counselor Bencomo, I shared my screen, and you'll see in 2009, the reported year, euthanasia was 10,387 out of 15,000. That's 2/3. That's 66%. And last year, that number, calendar year 2019, was 1,875 out of 9,200 going out the door. So that's 20%. So they are making progress, and as Clint said, there is no such thing as an absolute no-kill shelter. Sometimes that's the most humane thing you can do to an animal that is sick or injured. Sorry. There are also animals that maybe, as Clint alluded to, is the court order. Those are dangerous or potentially dangerous animals that have been determined by the courts that they have to be put down because of their aggressiveness or their danger to the rest of the community. So there are legitimate reasons. The Animal Service Center also, per the city's ordinances, they are our essentially our court hold facility. So if an animal is held for quarantine for rabies and known to the owner, they go to the Animal Service Center. So those animals take up space within the center, as do potentially dangerous animals that can't be held at home pending adjudication. So those numbers also contribute to the cost of running the shelter. For rabies holds and for court holds, the owner is charged their fees for boarding of the animal. If that animal is known, if we know who the owner of that animal is. That's not always the case.
Okay, so with the three scenarios that you present, thank you for that, by the way. There was a lot of that I didn't know. With the three scenarios that you presented, has the county been approached with those? You're on mute. Oh, there we go.
We had, I always have to look at my microphone to see if it's turned off or on. We have not had the same detailed discussion that we're having with you today with the county. We've had some very preliminary discussions. We did it back in 2017. Option two or phase two is not really the most realistic. The city taking over county animal control function, I think it increased the budget by almost $1 million. That was assuming that the county kept paying for their staff and all of their functions. So that's not realistic. So we can go to this next level now with the county based on your feedback. I've been making a list of questions and areas, items to take into consideration if we move forward in discussing with the county management. I think if we could commit to a flat fee for 1 or 2 years before going to a per animal basis, that will help us out. It will also give us an opportunity to look at our practices on animal intake between the two entities. Clint and I will disagree, and that's the part of being a professional. The city and the county do return to owners differently, like Councilor Flores spoke about. In the city, an animal running at large presents two hazards: a traffic hazard, people trying to avoid hitting an animal, or hitting an animal could cause an accident. And the other thing is the density in the community, the ability for an animal to cause a bite. We have cat bites, not just dog bites. We do have cat bites where kids think, oh, great, they see a cat in a park and they go, let me go pet him, and then he scratches them or bites them. So we don't chase animals home. We try to apprehend them, get them home, make sure that when they're returned home, they're secure. In the county, especially with a dog, they will chase a dog home. I've seen it myself. Stick my head out the window and yell at the dog to go home, because I live in a semi-rural area, and county animal control will chase a dog home because, one, it's a lot to pick it up and to take it, and a dog will go home. A cat, not so much, but a dog will go home. So, and it's safe to do that in the county. And I'm pretty sure the county animal control officers, if they don't think it's safe to chase an animal home, they won't. So there are different reasons for different practices that are very legitimate, both city and county animal control.
Great. And then my last question is, in the plans for the future, are there conversations to sort of bring back what used to be the spay and neuter program, or to expand that again?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Bencomo, that needs to be part of the discussion, returning spay and neuter. The county is funding that through SNAP. The city previously funded it through the Telstra Fund until it was cut off for animals. I disagree with that. I disagreed with it at the time. I was the program manager over that funding mechanism. My argument is an intact animal, unspayed, unneutered animal presents a greater health risk to the community than a spayed or neutered one. The reason is they're more likely to get out, they're more likely to be aggressive, and they're more likely to bite someone. And if there is one thing that I will always say to everybody, and Clint and most of the Animal Service Center board members agree with me, is none of us want a rabies outbreak. That is the most dangerous thing that we could experience here in this community. We've had health exposures at the center and so forth, but none of us ever want a rabies outbreak. That is a cruel disease to an animal, and it's cruel to humans as well. So that should be the Animal Service Center and animal control functions are a public health and safety function, clear and first and foremost. So I'm supportive of that, and we need to find a mechanism to get back to that through the shelter. So I'll put that on my list of getting back to low-cost spay and neuter.
Great. Well, I look forward to that conversation, and thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Clint, were you going to say something?
I just wanted to just do a shout out really quick that is the plan to use the existing animal shelter we're in now. When the new one is built, we plan to convert some of the areas of the existing shelter to spay and neuters, to get multiple doctors in, multiple spay and neuter teams in, and we'll do some high capacity sterilization. Now, that will take funding, and that's where, again, all these things are kind of up in the air. I want to know for the funding, but that's the plan.
Great. That's great. Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, and everyone, I apologize. I actually had to jump off 2 minutes ago, but I look forward to this continued conversation.
Actually, I think you're the last one with comments. I think the direction is there to move forward, get with the county, see what type of discussion we can have, and then they'll bring it back to us for an update. Is that good? Yeah. All right. Good. Okay. I believe that's it. That was the only item on the agenda. So if there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Grandela, second by Councilor Flores, that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we're adjourned. It's 4:02 p.m. And then Christine, I'll just be here to do the agenda setting whenever you're ready.
So, Mayor, we need to remove an item.
Okay.
We're removing number 5, the contract for the CPA audit.
Oh, that's the only one that's going to be consent.
Of course.
Okay.
And you have the correct one. It's the 3rd amended.
I believe so.
Okay. Okay. Well, then I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so this is the agenda setting meeting for the May 18th, 2020 City Council meeting. Number 1, non-consent.
1 non-consent.
2, non-consent.
2 non-consent.
3, non-consent.
3 non-consent.
4, non-consent.
4 non-consent.
6, non-consent.
6 non-consent.
And of course, 5 has been removed.
5 has been removed.
7, non-consent.
7 non-consent.
8, non-consent.
8 non-consent.
And 9, non-consent.
And 9 non-consent. Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll see you all later.